I am Avery Bennett, 34 years old, and if you passed me on the street, you would see nothing remarkable. My life, at least to the outside world, was a quiet one, a modest apartment on the east side of Austin, a reliable sedan that hummed but never purred, and a daily routine that never seemed to stray too far from center. That at least is what my family believed. They never saw the long hours spent in the glow of my laptop screen, the business calls I took at midnight, or the stack of legal documents hidden in a battered briefcase beneath my bed. There was always more to my story, a truth I had guarded, sometimes out of pride, mostly out of necessity. When the time came, I would not simply step out of the shadows. I would bring the sunlight with me. If you have ever felt like the forgotten one, the person in the family photo who seems to fade into the wallpaper, then perhaps you will recognize some of yourself in me. Before I continue, let me know where you are listening from. And if you have ever watched the golden child shine while you stood in the wings, you are not alone. From the moment I could form memories, I understood my place in the Bennett household. My sister Madison was 5 years older, a force of nature with a mane of honey blonde hair, a ready smile, and a confidence that made adults pause and take notice. She was the type of child who collected trophies by accident, who seemed to glide through life as if the world had been smoothed for her feet. While Madison took piano lessons in the afternoons, I swept the back porch and set the dinner table, careful not to chip the family china. When she was presented with a gleaming blue bicycle for her 8th birthday, I received a worn second-hand version, 3 years later, still good enough, as my mother said, for someone like you. It was not malice. It was just the way things were. Looking back, I can trace the outlines of my own disappointment, confusion, and eventually resignation. My mother Gloria would beam at Madison's report cards, her hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "Spectacular, darling. We knew you could do it." When I came home with "straight," as the response was more subdued, "That's what we expect from you, Avery. Why can't you smile more like your sister?" There were early lessons in the value of invisibility. On my 10th birthday, Madison's regional gymnastics meet was scheduled for the same day. My father, Patricia, apologized over breakfast. "We'll make it up to you, Avery. Your sister's event is important for her college prospects." The party was quietly canceled. No cake, no candles, and certainly no family song. I remember sitting on the back porch, knees tucked under my chin, listening to the echo of Madison's medals clinking in the kitchen. By high school, the patterns were set in stone. Madison was crowned homecoming queen, and the same night I finished a science project alone at the kitchen table. "You'll get your turn someday," my mother promised. But in the Bennett house, turns were not distributed equally. Madison was accepted into a prestigious Ivy League university, her tuition covered without question. I received a handshake, a student loan application, and a quiet nudge toward the local community college. Yet even in those years of quiet rejection, I could not bring myself to turn away completely. Despite the sting of indifference, I supported my family however I could. When my mother fell ill, I made an anonymous donation, $93,000, to cover her medical bills, never revealing the source. When Madison's wedding deposit ran short, a payment was made from a friend of the family just in time to keep the reservation at the Lakeshore venue. I became, in my own strange way, their silent safety net. If you have ever been the reliable one nobody appreciates, you know the ache of loving people who never see you, not truly. I should have seen it coming when the first invitations to Madison's engagement party went out and mine arrived weeks later, addressed by a secretary. As the day of the wedding approached, I tried to brace myself for what was to come, telling myself that I no longer cared. But I did care. Somewhere beneath the years of quiet acceptance, resentment began to flicker. What I did not realize was that this gathering, the celebration meant to crown Madison as the rightful heir, would not simply expose old wounds. It would force every hidden truth into the open. If you have ever stood at the edge of a family gathering wondering when the ground beneath you would shift, stay with me. Because sometimes the best revenge comes not with fury but with quiet preparation. And what my family did not know was that I was already holding the matches. The morning of Madison's wedding dawned with the thick humming heat of a Texas summer. Austin was alive with anticipation, flowers trucked in from as far as California, musicians tuning instruments in the shade, caterers darting like fish in a stream through the grand halls of Lake Travis Estate. If there was a stage to announce a dynasty's next chapter, this was it. I arrived early, slipping in through the side entrance as instructed. My invitation, hand-addressed, but clearly not in anyone's handwriting, I recognized had arrived late, and with a note, "Please help with seating arrangements." It was a clear message: there are guests, and there are helpers. I set about straightening white linens and double-checking name cards, pausing when my mother breezed past trailing perfume and tension. "Avery, darling, remember to keep out of the photographer's way. This is Madison's day. Try not to stand too close to the family table," Gloria said, her voice gentle but edged with something unmistakable. If you've ever been relegated to the shadows at a family event, you'll know the unique sting of being both present and invisible. The Bennett name was everywhere on the programs in gold foil on the invitations, even stitched into the custom table runners. And yet I was nowhere except in the background. Guests began to arrive in a flurry of silk and laughter. Old money, new money whispers of billion-dollar mergers and charitable endowments floated above the chatter. Madison, radiant in a custom gown that cost more than my car, glided through the room, stopping for air kisses and compliments. Her soon-to-be husband, Nicholas, the heir to a banking fortune, smiled beside her, as perfectly cast as any leading man. During the pre-ceremony, champagne toast, my father took to the microphone. "Today," Patricia began, "we celebrate not only Madison's marriage but the future of Bennett Holdings. Madison has always understood what it means to carry our legacy. She has the drive, the vision, the heart, everything we could have hoped for." The applause was thunderous. I found myself standing near the back, a tray of hors d'oeuvres in hand, out of place among waitstaff barely acknowledged by my own family. Then, as the room quieted, my mother leaned into the microphone, smiling sweetly. "Some people," she said, her eyes scanning the crowd, pausing briefly on me, "are simply guests in their own story. We are grateful for all the support Madison's received from family, friends, and others." Her tone was sugar over ice. A ripple of laughter passed through the room, some polite, some biting. I felt the old ache, humiliation blooming in my chest. If you've ever watched your family celebrate someone else's successes while minimizing your own, you understand. But the worst was yet to come. As the reception began and dinner was served, the atmosphere shifted. I noticed Madison and my parents gathered around a silver laptop, whispering, glancing my way, then back to the screen. A few minutes later, a subtle commotion near the main table, my name mentioned, heads turning. I made my way toward them, sensing trouble. My father, always the showman, called for attention once more. "We have one final announcement," he began. "As of today, all voting shares of Bennett Holdings, the family's trust fund, and the Lake Travis property will be transferred to Madison and Nicholas in honor of their new life together." He looked at me, then his voice lowering for effect. "Avery, you have always been resourceful. We hope you'll find your own path outside the family business." That line, delivered with a half smile and no warmth, landed harder than any slap. The words hung in the air, an eviction masked as a benediction. If you've ever been publicly dismissed, you know the way your face burns, the way you will your hands not to tremble. Guests murmured. Some stared at their plates, embarrassed for me, while others, emboldened by the spectacle, joined in with knowing glances. I stood there, swallowing the humiliation, unable to find words that wouldn't break me further. Then, as dessert was served, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It was a screenshot of a group chat the Bennett family's private circle mistakenly forwarded to me. In it, my parents and Madison joked about my persistent delusions of belonging, discussed seating me at the children's table, and called me, in Gloria's words, a necessary inconvenience. What I didn't know was that this same message had been accidentally airdropped to several guests, including the event planner and, as luck would have it, a well-known society columnist. Whispers grew louder, eyes darting between me and the head table. The humiliation was complete, a perfect storm of old wounds and new betrayals, all played out under the crystal chandeliers and watchful gaze of Austin's elite. If you have ever felt the room tilt against you, if you have ever realized that the people you trusted most were the architects of your pain, you will know the silence that settles in your soul. But what my family did not understand, what none of them suspected, was that the quiet ones are often the most dangerous. I had not come to this wedding empty-handed. My revenge, years in the making, was almost ready to be revealed. There is a saying I heard once: true wealth is measured not by what you inherit, but by what you build when no one believes in you. I suppose that is as close to my creed as I can get. If you have ever been forced to stand outside the family circle, you learn to draw warmth from other sources. You become inventive, resourceful, and most of all, patient. Years before Madison's wedding, my path diverged from the Bennett script. I left home with a single suitcase, a battered laptop, and a scholarship to a small college that nobody in my family bothered to visit. While Madison's name graced university donor plaques, mine was nowhere, and I learned quickly that independence comes at a cost. I rented a single room in a weathered house with 5 other students, worked nights at a downtown diner, and built websites for local businesses in exchange for little more than free meals or a ride home on rainy evenings. I remember the satisfaction of earning my first check, $1,400, for a website redesign for an insurance agency. It was the first time in my life my work was seen and valued, no matter how small the audience. When the Bennett family cut off support, it stung, but it also set me free. While Madison jetted off to Europe, I stayed up late, poring over business books borrowed from the library, learning about real estate investment and the maze of trusts and holding companies that insulated families like mine from true risk. I was not simply escaping my family. I was learning how they protected themselves and how those systems could be used by anyone smart enough to read the fine print. It was during these years that I met Taylor, my first real friend outside the Bennett circle. Taylor was sharp-tongued, relentless, and above all loyal. She was the first person to tell me, "You're not your family's failure. You are your own beginning." Her belief in me filled cracks I didn't know existed. Bit by bit, I built a life apart from the Bennetts. I launched a small digital agency, worked with startups, invested carefully, and put away every spare dollar. While the world watched Madison's engagement and my parents' latest charity gala, I was negotiating a deal for a minority share in a fintech company, one that would years later be valued at $28 million. My portfolio grew slowly, quietly, never once drawing attention back to me. The greatest gift I ever received did not come from my parents, but from my grandfather, Harold Bennett, who, perhaps seeing something of himself in me, named me the beneficiary of his personal trust fund. The documentation arrived one cold morning via a lawyer named Mrs. Evelyn Clark. "Your grandfather wanted you to have this," she said, sliding a thick folder across her mahogany desk. "He believed in your ability to choose your own path." The amount was staggering, $13 million in a trust protected by layers of legal armor. Even then, I did not spend a penny recklessly. Instead, I used the fund as collateral for new ventures and invested in quiet, unglamorous projects, renovating affordable housing, funding a local tech incubator, providing seed capital to women-led startups. Over time, the legal and financial framework I built became more complex, more protective. I set up a family office, Bennett Legacy Advisors, managed by trusted partners like Taylor and our attorney, Mrs. Clark. Every deal, every asset, every movement was done in silence, my name never appearing in public records. To the world, I was a modest consultant. To a select few, I was the architect of a financial fortress. Meanwhile, I watched the Bennetts from afar. Their company, Bennett Holdings, grew complacent, bloated with old money and self-importance. Madison's star continued to rise, but I could see the cracks: mismanaged assets, risky investments, a reliance on outdated practices that would someday come home to roost. When the first rumors began that a rival investment firm, Helix Capital, headed by the formidable Sandra Lee, was preparing a takeover bid, my heart quickened. What my family never suspected was that I was Helix Capital's largest silent partner, holding over 70% of the equity, all funneled through a maze of trusts and LLCs. Every time Madison and Patricia met with Helix Capital's representatives, they were unknowingly negotiating with me. My plan was simple: wait for the day when Bennett Holdings would be most exposed, when public attention would make any humiliation inescapable. The wedding was perfect. Every society column would be watching. The deals were finalized the week before, paperwork executed, legal notices sealed and ready. Taylor, always my co-conspirator, arranged for the announcement to be delivered to the Bennett family in the most public way possible. The timing was set just as the wedding speeches would reach their climax. If you have ever prepared for a reckoning, you know the strange mix of anticipation and dread that fills your quiet moments. I would not simply claim my inheritance. I would show the world how the invisible daughter rewrote her own story. If you have ever doubted your own worth because the people closest to you failed to see it, hold on. The moment of truth was nearly here. I would not have to raise my voice nor plead for a seat at their table. I was about to buy the whole house. If you have ever wondered what it feels like to step into a room knowing the next hour will change the course of every life within it, let me tell you, it is both terrifying and electric. The day of Madison's wedding was not just a family celebration. It was a gathering of Austin's elite bankers, city officials, investors, society writers, even a handful of old rivals eager to sniff out scandal. I watched it all unfold as if seated behind a pane of glass, seeing every movement with crystal clarity and utter detachment. The early part of the evening passed in a daze. Guests toasted the happy couple, snapped photos beneath gilded arches, compared vacation homes and hedge fund returns. My parents, never more in their element, presided over the affair like monarchs, every gesture calculated for maximum effect. Madison sparkled in her designer gown, radiating the confidence of someone who has never known hunger, want, or rejection. As the time for the main speeches approached, Taylor found me by the terrace doors. She squeezed my hand, pressing a slim USB drive into my palm. "It's all set, Avery," she murmured. "When you're ready, give the signal." I slipped the drive into my pocket, nerves jangling but face serene. My father called the room to attention for one final toast, his voice ringing with pride and expectation. "To Madison and Nicholas, the future of the Bennett legacy, and to family, may it always stand strong." The applause was deafening. Before the clinking glasses could settle, the lights dimmed and a familiar chime signaled the start of a presentation on the hall's massive screens. The first slide bore the Bennett family crest. Then, in elegant lettering, notice of change in beneficial ownership, Bennett Holdings. A hush fell. My father's face paled. Madison leaned forward, confusion giving way to alarm. On screen, a recorded message began to play. It was Mrs. Evelyn Clark, our family's own legal counsel, her voice measured, composed, final. "As of this date, control of all primary assets, including Bennett Holdings, the Lake Travis estate, and the family trust fund valued at $42 million, has been legally and irrevocably transferred to the beneficiary designated by the late Harold Bennett. Effective immediately, all executive and financial authority now rests with Avery Bennett." The room erupted, gasps, whispered curses, the metallic scrape of forks against porcelain. Some guests craned their necks to look at me, others instinctively shifted away from my family's table as if embarrassment were contagious. The power dynamic shifted so quickly you could almost hear it snap. My father staggered to his feet, anger flushing his cheeks. "This is some kind of mistake. Avery is not the intended heir. We had a family arrangement." Madison's voice, shrill and desperate, cut through his protest. "She's lying. She must have forged something. Avery, you can't do this. This was never supposed to be yours." I waited for the commotion to settle before stepping forward, voice steady. "Everything is documented, witnessed, and filed with the court. You always taught me, Dad, to read the fine print." I did. Grandfather trusted me to carry on his legacy, and I intend to do so with integrity and transparency. From across the ballroom, a new wave of whispers broke out. The family's group chat had been airdropped accidentally, or perhaps not, to several prominent guests, including journalists. Every cruel joke, every callous remark, every necessary inconvenience and persistent delusion of belonging was now public. The text logs flashed on cell phones and even briefly on the projection screen before Taylor ever efficient switched to the closing legal summary. The damage was done. The guests, many of whom had known me only as the quiet Bennett, now stared with new respect, or at the very least with a curiosity reserved for those who have managed an impossible coup. My mother tried to gather herself, her mask of grace slipping as she hissed through gritted teeth. "You will regret this, Avery. This house was never yours. You should be grateful we let you stand beside us at all." I met her gaze and smiled, not cruelly but with the serenity of someone who has finally stepped out of the shadows. "That's where you're wrong, Mother. This house was built on the shoulders of everyone you tried to keep out. You taught me what it means to be alone, and I learned how to thrive. If you've ever dreamed of a moment when justice would be both public and undeniable, this was mine. The old alliances, the carefully managed reputation, the certainty that humiliation only ever flowed one way, shattered. The aftermath was quick and merciless. Reporters swarmed, snapping photos and scribbling notes. My parents fled the hall, red-faced and tight-lipped. Madison, the golden child, left the stage not in triumph but in tears. But I, Avery Bennett, the outsider, the silent one, stood beneath the lights, not as the family's shame but as its future. The quiet had ended. My voice had finally filled the room. There is a silence that follows public ruin, a heaviness in the air as dust settles and the shape of a new world emerges. In the days after the wedding, Austin buzzed with gossip. Headlines ran with words like "heir disinherited" and "silent daughter seizes control." Photographs of my family's stunned faces, my mother's brittle poise, Madison's red-rimmed eyes, my father's glare circulated in every society, column, and business journal for 100 miles. But the real consequences were not played out in newsprint or over polite brunches. They unfolded in boardrooms, in the muted corridors of law offices, and most of all in the echoing emptiness of a house that no longer belonged to the people who had built their lives around exclusion. My first act as the new head of Bennett Holdings was simple transparency. I opened the books invited in a third-party audit and began unraveling the network of old debts and risky deals that my father and Madison had hidden for years. I met with the employees, some wary, some relieved, and told them quietly that their work would matter in this new era. My phone buzzed with calls from banks and business partners. Some wanted reassurance. A few wanted revenge of their own now that the old guard was gone. For my family, the reckoning was personal. My father's attempts to block the transfer failed in court. The will and trust documents signed and witnessed years before were ironclad. Every lawyer he hired came back with the same news: the assets were no longer his to command. I watched from across polished conference tables as the pride drained from his face. Madison, for the first time in her life, found herself outside the golden circle. She called, then texted, then sent a letter, each one more desperate than the last. "We're family. We can't let this come between us." But it was not the money that stood between us, and she never seemed to understand that. It was the years of exclusion, the easy cruelty, the assumption that I would always be there to clean up her mess, never expecting anything for myself. My mother was the last to reach out, her tone colder and more measured. She invited me to lunch at a private club downtown. "You made your point," she said, stirring her tea with a silver spoon. "You have the house, the money, the company. But legacy is more than paperwork, Avery. You'll never have the family you wanted." I looked at her and felt for the first time not anger, but a kind of pity. "You're right, Mother. Legacy is more than money. It's the kindness we show and the hurt we inflict. I will carry my own name forward, not just yours." Some nights I walked through the Lake Travis estate, listening to the wind move through the empty halls. The rooms were different, stripped of old portraits, freshly painted, the shelves filled with books and plants and framed photos of friends, not just ancestors. I felt the ache of what had been lost, but also the strange peace that comes with the end of longing. The world outside watched, waiting for some sign that the new Bennett era would be a disaster. But instead, the company stabilized. Employees flourished. We donated millions, carefully written out as $1.2 million, $3 million, to organizations that had never received a cent from the old regime. Every act of charity, every bonus paid, every scholarship awarded was a quiet reminder that power can be used to build, not just to wound. If you have ever craved the moment when the hurt would stop and the healing begin, then you know what those months felt like. I no longer lived for their approval or waited for their acceptance. I had built something of my own. In the final meeting with my family, awkward, formal, in a lawyer's office, thick with silence, I said the words I needed to hear. "Family is not a right. It is a responsibility. You taught me that by example. I choose now to move forward. Whether you follow is up to you." There was no applause, no hugs, only the sense that a cycle had ended and a new one was ready to begin. If you've ever waited for justice, for closure, for the scales to tip, sometimes it comes not with fireworks but with the slow dawning of morning light, gentle and final. The story was not quite over, but the fight was. The days that followed the wedding became a spectacle all their own. Austin's social pages buzzed with headlines: "Heir apparent ousted at lavish lake, Travis wedding Bennett legacy," appended in shock announcement, and the story spread far beyond the city limits. I kept my phone on silent, letting the world chatter. There was nothing left I needed to say. The first to try and salvage their dignity was my father. He called not to apologize, but to negotiate. "Avery, this isn't what your grandfather wanted," he insisted, his voice thin with desperation. "There are things you don't understand about running a family business. If you just hand back control, we can sort this out quietly." I listened, allowing him the illusion of authority for a few moments before I spoke. "Dad, I understand more than you think. Grandfather left detailed instructions, and I intend to honor them. Bennett Holdings will move forward with real accountability starting now." My mother's approach was different, prideful, almost icy. She sent an email thick with legalese demanding that I respect the traditions and values upon which this family was built. It was signed formally, "Gloria Bennett, founding matriarch." I replied simply, "Tradition is no excuse for cruelty. My decisions are final." Madison was silent for days. When she finally called, her voice was raw, stripped of its usual gloss. "Avery, I didn't know you had it in you." I thought she hesitated, pain evident. I thought we had time to fix things. I was wrong. For the first time, I felt neither anger nor triumph, only a calm, bittersweet peace. Maybe Maddie. But some wounds need distance to heal. The legal consequences settled quickly. The transfer of assets, Bennett Holdings, the Lake Travis estate, the family trust, was irreversible. My team, led by Taylor and Mrs. Clark, took over operations. Financial audits began, outdated contracts were renegotiated, and the era of hidden favoritism ended with the stroke of a pen. The family's reputation took a public blow, but it was their private world that unraveled. The Society columnist who received the leaked group chat ran a follow-up story quoting the worst remarks. Avery is just a necessary inconvenience. She can sit at the kids' table. She will never be one of us. The public humiliation my parents had engineered for years was now theirs to wear. Some guests sent kind notes, others withdrew invitations to upcoming galas. The same people who once angled for Madison's attention now sent inquiries my way, hoping to stay in the good graces of the new power behind the Bennett name. But I was not interested in playing the old games. I made it clear there would be no revenge, no spiteful retribution. Employees who had been dismissed for siding with me were invited back, and charitable programs cut for budget reasons were reinstated. The Lake Travis estate, so long a symbol of exclusion, became a center for community events and mentorship programs. One afternoon, I stood alone on the terrace looking out over the water as a group of local students laughed and practiced speeches for their upcoming debate tournament. The house echoed not with the emptiness of old wounds, but with hope. In time, my family's attempts at reconciliation took on a pattern. My father with business requests, thinly disguised as family dinners, my mother with invitations to society events, now less frequent. Madison with hesitant texts, never quite brave enough for a real conversation. I replied politely, but never invited them back into my confidence. If you have ever endured the aftermath of a reckoning, you know there is no final moment of triumph, only the quiet work of building something new out of what remains. Justice, I learned, does not taste of vengeance, but of freedom. The more I focused on the future, the less the old pain mattered. The world remembers drama, but life rewards those who persevere. In claiming my inheritance, I gained something more lasting than a name or an estate. I gained a self-respect that cannot be measured in any bank account. As the months slipped by, the headlines faded. The story of the quiet Bennett who rewrote the legacy became old news. But within these walls and within my heart, a different story had begun. 6 months have passed since that night beneath the chandeliers at Lake Travis. The world has moved on, as it always does, chasing new scandals and fresh triumphs. But in the silence that followed the storm, I found the freedom to build a life on my own terms. For the first time, I truly understood what it meant to come home. The house on the lake is mine now, not as a trophy, but as a place of peace. I have repainted the walls in soft earth tones, filled the kitchen with wildflowers, and turned the old study into a library open to any child who wants to read. The garden, once reserved for exclusive parties, now welcomes neighbors for Sunday picnics. The laughter I hear at dawn is not the brittle sound of forced celebrations, but the genuine music of friends and strangers alike, coming together over shared meals and stories. My days are simple: morning walks along the water, afternoons spent mentoring young entrepreneurs, evenings with Taylor and her family, whose loyalty never wavered. The circle of friends I have chosen is not large, but it is true. We celebrate each small victory, mourn each loss, and remind one another that real family is built, not inherited. Professionally, the work continues. With the burden of family expectation lifted, I have focused on projects that matter: expanding affordable housing, investing in local businesses run by women and minorities, and funding scholarships for students who, like me, were once overlooked. The Bennett name, once synonymous with exclusion, now stands for opportunity and quiet generosity. Sometimes I catch my own reflection in the window and wonder at the transformation from invisible child to architect of a new legacy. And what of my family? They remain where they have always been, circling the periphery of my new world. My father sends the occasional letter, sometimes asking for advice, sometimes simply reminiscing about better days. My mother, her pride, never quite healed, volunteers for charities that keep her name in print. Madison, after a long silence, found work with a non-profit in another city. We speak rarely, but when we do, it is with a gentleness born from distance and time. Do I forgive them? In some ways, yes. In others, I have learned that forgiveness is not always about inviting someone back into your life. Sometimes it is about letting go of the hope that things could have been different. If you have ever found yourself rebuilding after a storm, if you have learned through hardship that your worth is not tied to anyone else's recognition, then you know the quiet joy I carry now. The story of my revenge is in the end a story of renewal. I did not win by destroying others, but by refusing to let their vision of me become my own. So, I ask you as I look out over the lake at dusk, the water soft and golden in the last light. Who is your real family? Who would you choose if blood were not the only bond? I hope you find your answer and the courage to build it. Thank you for listening, for letting my story fill your evening. If you have a story of your own, a triumph, a heartbreak, a quiet victory, share it below. You never know who needs to hear it.